Hi everyone and welcome to my studio. I'm Diane and today we're going to paint a simple lakeside sunset, so let's get started. Now this painting is going to be very simple in terms of colour. We're going to be using mostly ultramarine, alizarin crimson, some Winsor violet or any kind of purple, and a yellow, and I think here I was probably using lemon yellow or cadmium yellow. Now the shine's gone off the paper, so I can start to put in the colours of the sky, and this is where you need a light touch and you don't need to fiddle. So I'm going to be picking up some of my bright yellow, which could be cadmium yellow, or in my case it's Old Holland Chevening yellow, and I'm just dropping that in using a fairly large brush. This is a size 16 Sepia Gold by Winsor and Newton brush that I'm using here, and because this is water, obviously the sky is going to reflect in the water to a certain extent. And now I'm dropping in a little bit of alizarin crimson, which I've mixed with the yellow to make an orangey kind of colour, which is going to be sort of clouds, just flicking it in. And at this stage, this kind of painting where you're doing a wet in wet sky always looks ridiculous. I mean, there's no other word for it. It's just ridiculous. But stick with it. Just go with the flow. And now this is ultramarine, and I'm really loving this Old Holland ultramarine. It's very soft and flows absolutely beautifully, so I heartily recommend that. And I'm just flicking it in. And the thing to do is not to try to smooth out those brush strokes. They will smooth themselves out more than you imagine. So basically just quickly dropping in ultramarine all the way around the patch of yellow. And the good thing about ultramarine is that it doesn't really quickly mix with yellow to make green. You can see that it's keeping its distance, so to speak. You don't really want that much green in the sky. And so here now I'm dropping in some ultramarine mixed with alizarin crimson, which is giving me the cloudy, darker reddish blue colour for the sky. And I'm putting a good amount of that in the water as well. And you can still see plenty of brush strokes, but the point is you've got to trust that the paint knows what it's doing. And so you're going to stop before you do the last stroke. That was something one artist said to me a long time ago. Always stop one stroke before you think you've finished. And that's very good advice. So if you think you're going to just put in one more, don't, because it might spoil everything. So I'm now coming back to the painting after it has completely dried. I just finished it off with the hairdryer a little bit to make sure it was totally dry. And as you can see, the brush strokes have blended in quite nicely. And the next step now is going to be to paint in the hills in the background. And this is a painting pretty much out of imagination. It's not any particular place. So I'm making it up as I go along. And here now I'm mixing ultramarine blue with alizarin crimson to make a dark, very dark purpley colour, which I'm going to drop in along the horizon line. And I have a little trick for doing that. We don't all have incredibly steady hands for drawing straight lines. So as you noticed, I drew the horizon in with a ruler. Breaks all the rules to use a ruler on a watercolour painting, but you know, needs must. So I drew the line, and now I'm going to take my plastic ruler and I'm going to lay it back along the line, and I'm going to use that as a guide for drawing in the hills. So I've got a nicely loaded brush with plenty of purple in it, and I'm just going to use it as a kind of mask. So I can paint up to the ruler. Don't let the paint go underneath it. It looks like it has, but it's actually on top of the ruler, so that's not going to show. And now I'm just building my mountains in the distance, my hills. Just painting them in, safe in the knowledge that the line is going to remain nice and crisp. So you could paint mountains here, real mountains, spiky, pointy mountains, or just a gentle line of hills like this. Entirely up to you, both would work perfectly. You can feel like something out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy here, like Slarty Bart Fast building his fjords, you're constructing your hills and your mountains. It's wonderful, the power of watercolour, isn't it? And notice that as you put in the hills, the sky seems to acquire more of a sense of reality. Once it's got some actual geography underneath it, you can see, ah, yes, that's the sky. And take away the ruler and you have a pretty straight line. Just enough variation to indicate a little island sticking out there on the left-hand side, so it looks good. So now I'm mixing up some more of the same colour, the ultramarine blue, to make a nice dark purple again, with a bit more water this time. My first mix was quite thick, and I'm going to be using my sword liner brush, my long-haired flicky brush, and I'm just going to dash in here with some beautiful free flicking grasses in the foreground. And this is such a good way to give a sense of perspective into your painting. You've got something close at hand and that gives you the distance. You need plenty of paint, doesn't want to be too thick, but plenty of colour in it. And just move those reeds or grasses, whatever you want them to be, along the front of the painting. I don't think it's a good idea to put them all the way along, because that sort of makes a barrier into the painting, but it's nice to have them to one side. And then you can just flick a few dots in, just for the sake of variation. Try not to get it into the sky, but we'll have to turn that into a bird later. I'll just dab it out for now, and we won't even know that happened. If you want to be more careful than me, you could put a piece of tissue paper over your sky to protect it while you're doing the flicky bits. So that wouldn't be a bad idea. I'm just putting in a few slightly thicker grasses there. And this is so easy, this painting. Anyone really, seriously, even children would be able to do a pretty good job of this. I used to teach this, something similar to this, when I was a school teacher. And the kids were always very pleased with it, the way it turned out. And now I'm going to just drop in a couple of birds into the sky here. And lo and behold, we're really nearly finished. So I realised when I got to this point that I hadn't put the reflection of the land at the far side of the lake into the painting. So I'm going to show you a neat trick for how to do that, just so that you can get the line exact, and that's not as easy as it sounds. Take a piece of tracing paper and just trace over the outline of the land in the background there, and then in order to be able to transfer that into position on the painting, it's going to have to be turned upside down. So without turning it over, just turn it upside down and then go over the line that you drew with a soft pencil. I'm using a 3B graphite pencil here just to go over the top of that line very quickly. You don't need to fill in the whole area because you're just going to copy the line. So just quickly go over that with a soft pencil and then take your painting and line up the horizon line that you've drawn in with the horizon line on the painting, making sure everything's dry underneath, of course. So just line that up like that, and then draw over. What you've done there is you've made a kind of carbon copying paper. So just quickly draw over, excuse my hair, draw over that, and that gives you an exact shape to mirror the land in the distance. And then you can just mix up a dark colour similar to the colour in the of the landscape there, and then just paint it in. I'm using a dark purpley colour, Winsor purple Winsor Violet or Quinacridone Violet, something like that, and I'm mixing it with a little bit of black to make it stronger, and maybe a bit of phthalo blue as well, just to match the colour in the background. You just want it a little bit lighter, perhaps. You don't want it too exactly the same as the land, but just drop that in, and then you'll find that it's easy to follow the same shape as the hills in the distance. And just leave a few gaps in at the point where the land meets the water, because usually there's a little bit of a lighter area there. You can also reinforce that afterwards by going in with one of those white pens, if you happen to have one, or a little bit of white gouache, just to put a few ripples on the water. So you could leave this out if you wanted to keep the whole thing simple, and it still would be okay, because there are times when you can't see the reflection of the land on the water. But since the sky reflects so strongly, it seems logical, really, and I would suggest that this is a quick way of mirroring the landscape line. So there we are, the painting's definitely finished now, and I hope you enjoyed watching me doing this. Hopefully you learnt something, and if you did, perhaps you'd consider giving me a like and maybe subscribing if you aren't already subscribed. So I look forward to seeing you next time, and I'll say bye for now, everybody. Bye!